and I'm not as familiar with the land back movement. I wear a shirt that says land back because I believe I understand what it means. A lot of people think that it means disenfranchisement and ethnic cleansing of white people. And that's simply not the case at all. I think that probably there's a lot of fear around that because that is how colonial European administrators treated everybody else.
I like salad. Do you like salad?
Welcome to Canadian Salad,
a fun, factual, and friendly podcast about culture and integration in Canada.
I'm one of your hosts. I'm Ho Shen Ho from China, currently living in Vancouver, unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
And I'm your other host, Andrea McCoy, an immigrant from the United States, broadcasting you from the unceded traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations.
And you're listening to Canadian Salad.
We could go forever. Yes. Welcome back, everyone. Another Tuesday, another episode. And we are very excited because we have another guest. We had a guest last week and we're having a new guest this week.
I know, we're all in for a treat.
Yes.
Two guests in a row.
Yes. And even more so, his first name is a good treat, especially when you're camping. When you have s'mores, what do you use? Graham crackers. No, I'm sorry. That was terrible. We'll edit that out. Yes, but we have a special guest. Graham, what's your last name? I actually don't know.
I go by Graham Richard in English, and my Haida name is Jostu. My other Haida name is Gilgyans, and from Canusli matriline here in Haida Gwaii, which is part of the Raven series of matrilineages here in Haida Gwaii. So I'm just a citizen at this time. I have no official capacity, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think in Haida, is that correct? In Haida tradition, there's the Eagle clan and then there's the Raven clan? Or?
Yeah, so there's two separate matrilineages in Haida society. And yeah, from the moment of your birth, you adopt the crest, the identities, the rights and responsibilities of your mother's family.
Okay.
It's designed in the opposite way to the patriarchal sort of Roman model or the Mesopotamian model, where men become the center of society and marriage is the sort of base unit of society. Society, it reflects a much older way of understanding how we relate to one another. It's a matrilineal culture. That means that your primary relationship and responsibility and identity relates to your mother. So it's really quite different than
Yeah.
Than a patriarchal society, though.
Canadian society. Yeah,
For sure.
Sure.
Wow. Yeah, I'd like to try that actually for a long time. I think
Yeah.
kind of tired of this Roman Mesopotamian patriarchy model. It's just
It solves so many problems, guys. Yeah, we need to mass adopt it. There's so many problems just evaporate.
Yeah. Here, I agree.
I
know.
Well, I invited Graham on this episode because back in April of last year, this has kind of been a very long process in place, but in April of last year, the province of BC and the Haida Nation announced the Rising Tide Haida Tidal Lands Agreement, which I sadly do not know how to pronounce the first two words before that. This was out of the Narwhal. Graham, do you know the name the full name of the agreement title?
Kaisolchid Gisla Gulgung. Rising Tide Haida Tidal Lands Agreement. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I know. I didn't want to skip it completely, but I didn't want to butcher it either.
Okay,
Yeah. Oh, thanks. But yeah, historically, from what I understand, I've read, it is the biggest land back agreement that has been signed by both a provincial government and is enshrined, I believe, in federal law or federal recognition, at least. Probably, but yeah, not saying it right. But it formally recognizes Haida ownership of all lands of Haida Gwaii. This is from the Narwhal. We'll include the link in our show notes, but this is the first time in Canadian history that the colonial government has recognized Indigenous title across an entire terrestrial territory And it's the first time this kind of recognition has occurred outside of the courts, is what they had said.
I wouldn't say that it occurred entirely
Okay.
out of the court. The threat of losing this case in front of the entire world badly in court is what really brought Canada to the table to negotiate title. But the evidence and the hard work that was put into gathering evidence for our title cases was so overwhelming to Canada and BC that they've essentially agreed to simply recognize us outside of court.
I see. And was there, you had said that the reason, or can you go back to why it wasn't in court and why it was outside of the courts? I guess maybe unpack a little bit of what that framing means.
Yeah, so in 1861, the British government had established the colony of Queen Charlotte Islands, but at the time it really only existed on paper and in name. It was a colony that existed in a drawer on a piece of paper in Victoria. It wasn't a real established colony or anything. There was a very tiny bit of presence with miners coming up here and doing some exploring and stuff. But even they had to recognize they needed to pay for their mining rights. They paid the Haida people for their mining rights. So, in their exploration rights. 1862, you have the smallpox genocides that swept up and down the coast that affected so many different nations in the territories that we now call BC, and really enabled there to be a true annexation of Haida Gwaii, really enabled the city of Victoria to assert dominance in Haida Gwaii in a true way. The Haida population was reduced to about 500 people, and because of that, it is one of the most complete genocides in history, aside from maybe some of the stuff that Genghis Khan did, where he just completely eliminated entire language groups. But yeah, it's a world-changing event that very few Canadians and beyond that British Columbians could even name or recall. Like, there's no training at all about this. So if you 1862 to anybody on the street in Victoria, you'll have no idea about that date or why it's significant or anything, but it is the reason that they are living in the world that they live in. It shaped the entire world, and the names of those responsible for the genocide are imprinted on all the streets throughout the whole area. Since 1862, Haida have been building their case and arguing with colonial authorities that we have always lived in Haida Gwaii and that we are the rightful stewards of Haida Gwaii. We belong here. We belong to the land. And it was an incredible achievement to see that recognized. It was almost a surprise. Like, I've been working in the CHN office for about 8 years, and I really was thinking that I'd probably be fighting for Haida title for the rest of my career. Not as a lawyer or as a leader, not at the front of the team, but as a supporter. Like, my work, so much of my work is related to just supporting the teams that have been working on this case, that it's been recognized wholesale, through a bill. A bill in Parliament is 50 years, 40 years advancement. It's matter because we were prepared to fight for this for the next 40 years, 30 years, however long it took. Yeah.
So there wasn't an indicator maybe within the past 10 years that this would actually happen, is what you're saying.
Yeah, a lot of it, especially under Harper, a lot of the negotiations that occurred were disingenuous, or they occurred without a mandate from Canada. So negotiators would arrive to speak with CHN representatives and a Council of Haida Nation representatives. And it would be revealed partway through negotiations that they didn't actually have a mandate from the government to negotiate anything. And so in a court of law, that's described as negotiating in bad faith. The parties in negotiations like that need to negotiate in good faith. And that's one example of the many tricks and ploys that colonial authorities play on Indigenous people when they're supposed to be meeting with them in good faith. That's the kind of thing that I was looking at when I was working in the office at CHN and Communications. I thought, this is just going to go on and on forever. Canada and BC are going to be negotiating in this backhanded, disingenuous manner. But I think that the strength of the title case and the looming, the looming mass of evidence really brought Canada and BC to the table and changed the tone of everything. What we fought, the Haida people really, and our predecessors and our ancestors have fought for this.
Yeah.
He's a nail.
Yeah. And when the agreement was made, what was the reaction from the community? Was it a bit of shock? Probably a bit of, relief, or maybe disbelief. Is this actually really?
No, I think it was just more attitude of excitement, excitement and massive gratitude towards our leaders and our predecessors, ancestors, our elders. Yeah, everyone that has worked so incredibly hard in the nation to bring about that moment, to bring about that recognition. There's people that have been waiting for this their entire life, and they really worked so hard on it to make sure that it's the best possible, that we were in the best possible position that we could be. And that's the reason why it happened this way.
Exactly. Yeah. So then does this agreement mean that the Haida Nations have full sovereignty over Haida Gwaii land and islands, or what?
What does it entail to the community? What does it mean to the community?
This essentially means that the Haida will be able to operate in a much freer manner. There's going to be a lot more say that activities won't be able to go forward without consent or leadership from the Haida Nation in Haida territories.
Got you.
Yeah, there is, I think that your questions that you provided, you were asking about the nature of land back, right? And a lot of people are confused about well, maybe, I don't really know. I guess that's kind of a pan-Indian term, and I'm not as familiar with the land back movement. I wear a shirt that says land back because I believe I understand what it means. A lot of people think that it means disenfranchisement and ethnic cleansing of white people. And that's simply not the case at all. I think that probably there's a lot of fear around that because that is how colonial European administrators treated everybody else.
Exactly.
There's a sense of terror that from white people, that white people will be treated in the same way that they've been everybody else. Process of colonization. In this context of Haida title, it's very clear that all private lands that are owned by private owners, and that the Haida Nation is going to be respecting that and honoring those private ownerships. There's no land back doesn't mean that we're going to be tyrannical. It means that the government recognizes title. And in this context, from my perspective, from the colonial viewpoint, title means that you have the right to treat the land like you want, and essentially affords rights to owners to destroy the land as they see fit in order to extract resources and wealth. Indigenous title is kind of the opposite of colonial title. Indigenous title means that you belong to the land and that you have a responsibility for stewardship of the land. It means that you're going to be extracting resources. It means you're going to be having a society and economy and everything. But the level of connection and responsibility towards our territories it comes from the very heart of Haida culture. The respect for the land is the very center of Haida culture. It's written in the Haida Nation's constitution. We have a responsibility to treat the land with respect and to only harvest in accordance with the ability of nature to provide. So the meaning of title can be very different depending on who's interpreting it. Right?
Yeah.
So mine are in northern BC. Title means, oh, I get to just rip this mountain apart and very low level
Blow it
of
up, sell the rock.
yeah,
Yeah.
get the money out of the mountain, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Anything for greed,
Yeah, Indigenous title. It's a recognition of the,
responsibility. Yeah.
over,
The right and the responsibility.
over 14,000 years of living here and living in balance with Haida Gwaii and
Yeah.
understanding Haida Gwaii, learning about Haida Gwaii,
Mhm.
connected to these islands and honoring them, respecting them, stewarding them. So it's a very different conception of title.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, that is also I have to say, I learned something from that specifically because if you ask me about like title, that's the first thing I think of definitely is the colonial meaning of title that I have, this is mine. I get to do whatever I want. Is more focused on the right part, what do I have to this rather than the responsibility part of this.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most sustainable way of looking at it, actually. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And accountability too. I feel like there's another element that in colonial settings, there is no accountability for what you've done, whether that's damming up a stream, whether that's blowing up a mountain. You're not in rhythm, kind of like what you said, Graham, like you're responding out of what nature provides, not what you're forcing nature to provide in that regards. And I mean, it's one of those things that, it's educational for me too, to understand that like land back is a term that has different context from different nations, different indigenous communities or regions, and that it's not a monolith concept, but it is, but people just think, and I think that's why a lot of when the colonizers were enslaving people, they were afraid of the rebellion. They were afraid if these people are free, they will do the same exact thing to us. And we always my concept has always been like, well, this is how we do it and everyone else would do the same things to us. But that's never been the posture or the heart or the culture or practice or tradition of Indigenous people, whether that's here in Canada or even in other parts of the globe. So it's coming out of those very narrow mindsets.
Yeah, the fear towards Indigenous title recognition throughout Canada relates to terror of being treated as the colonized, which is just not reality. It's a demented fear that relates to the sort of subconscious knowledge of our history in Canada. Yeah, but it's not real. It's based in a sort of fantasy or a fundamental belief, a foundational belief that humans are essentially greedy monsters that treat each other like garbage. That's just not the case. It is the case for every single case of colonization that occurred from Europe, but there's many thousands of examples of people being treated really well for thousands of years in their societies.
Exactly. Yeah. So with this title, with this agreement, like what happens next? Has there been a reorienting of governance in certain aspects, whether that might be economic or with health or with like maybe even policing authorities? I'm not exactly sure that full governance and that sovereignty over the land. What does that look like now after the title and the agreement was made?
Yeah, but from my experience and just being in the community and looking around, everyone's very excitedly preparing to implement all kinds of different programming and standards, resource harvesting standards, all that. But there's a huge amount of work to do now. Preparing to implement title. What does Haida title implementation look like?
Sure.
Now we have official recognition from Canada of our inherent title that we always have known that we have had, and I've been denied, and that's immigrant. It's inherent, always belonged to us. Okay, this title, and now that we're in this new position, quite suddenly, I mean, where do we go from here? How do we build the government, the institutions, the structures that we need to generate the kind of society that we want to live in and that we know the ancestors would be proud of, that we know that the descendants will be proud to inherit from this generation. Yeah.
Is there anything before, like explicitly that you are aware of, anything before the agreement that limited Haida nations that now that agreement has been made? Like very clear things have been lifted off and there's been more agency in a certain area or place?
Definitive examples probably include like the implementation of forestry standards is coming down the way.
Okay.
Those who have been here for years and have failed to listen to Haida and have continued to practice destructively in extracting our resources will now need to cease those practices and recognize the dignity of our natural heritage. Massive. So yeah, there's so many moving pieces that's kind of hard to, and it's so early on, really. It's kind of hard to really pin anything down definitively at this point. There's so much movement. Things will be changing and moving to a Haida title model, and everyone right now is kind of discussing and negotiating what that will look like.
Got you. Yeah.
Do you think you foresee any specific challenges that you think that will gonna happen or may take a lot more time to implement? I know, like getting a government or getting a committee together, even to, I assume the committee would be formed to make certain decisions. Would that be the direction we're going?
Well, we already have a lot of structure. There's a lot of structure to work with. We have an entire national democracy that was established in 78, I believe. And it's existed outside of any colonial authority for its entire life. Since its foundation, the Council of Haida Nation has operated outside of colonial authority. It is its own thing, and it's made of its own membership, who are the Haida citizens, who are the descendant of the Haida ancestors. And that, for the last bundle of decades, has been growing in capacity, growing in size, growing in understanding and knowledge and competency. And so we do have a huge amount that we can definitely work with. CHN already has all of its own programming and its own process of democracy and its own process of representation, like elected representation. Those all of our elected reps sit on different committees, and those committees relate to the programs that CHN operates.
Well,
okay, do you follow that?
Yeah, we do follow it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find it also very interesting because I think a lot of people always think a democracy only exists in colonial society. No, really. Like sometimes talking about
America,
I know, they're not civilized. Yeah, they're not civilized. So like, our democracy only exists in this modern world with again colonial societies. But then it's always good to hear and confirm that many nations, even eons ago, have forms of democracy that exist. That is definitely not a new thing. It just, I think, colonial power always like to claim that they are the first one to do a lot of things, while it was never the case.
Yeah. But to be clear, CHN, the Council of Haida Nation, was established in the 70s, I think 78, if I'm recalling correctly. But and that was the formal adoption of a democratic model that was borrowed from the Greek model. So like Haida have operated under a structure called wasas or potlatch since time began. Like, I can't even remember when we started potlatch, but it's a long time ago, at least thousands and thousands of years ago. Which I guess, potlatch does have a lot of components that I think anthropologists would argue are democratic in nature.
Yeah.
But it is its own, a very different system of governance. Yeah. 100% sustainable, though. 100% sustainable model of governance. I mean, it lasted for at least 14,500 years, at least.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many ways forward, and it's honestly only found in Indigenous traditions and practices. And the things that we're doing now obviously are not sustainable. And when I say we, like colonial we, Canada, the colonial construct of, this portion of Turtle Island in many regards, it's not sustainable. And it would be just to live with or under or in a matriarchal democratic system. Yeah, that while it's so beautiful and attractive, it's still even hard for me to conceptualize in some ways, because I've only known this certain very structured, small, narrow way. And I think that's why these conversations are so important, especially for those of us who come on like an immigrant, pathway. We are not shown, taught, nor do we seek out, these kinds of conversations, but they're so necessary. And there's just so much history where, like with China, with Chinese immigrants back in 1920 under the Chinese Exclusion Act, it was Indigenous people who were saying, you're not given any farmland, you can farm on our land. We will come beside you. There's so many intersections that have happened, and yet the colonial way, I was talking about this with someone earlier today, but the colonial mindset is to just keep immigrants and Indigenous peoples apart. In fact, pit the immigrants against, or, but there is just, there's a lot more there that has created, that can have that connection and community that we've been just so duped under our marketing scheme of Canada.
Well, I think it's also the government, it's always a scheme of control, right? At the end of the day, it's about controlling narrative, controlling flow of people, controlling whether the power of immigrant as well, or indigenous people. That's why you keep them in a specific corner and don't give them everything that, the colonial people had, to keep them keep their head down. I think ultimately that's the ultimate control. But that's why, people fight back. And that's why, I think this land back is such a triumph too, with many people's, generations of struggle and persistence to get it there. And hopefully there's kind of more in the future as well.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yes.
Last question, Graham. From your perspective, obviously I touched a very tiny bit on the lack or the gap that a lot of immigrants that I know of have when it comes to connecting with First Nations or Indigenous communities and understanding the history, but not just the history, the culture, maybe the traditions, and learning more about just the neighbors around them. How, from your perspective, and us as settler immigrants, uninvited, how can we amplify land back initiatives along other First Nations?
Yeah, I think the most important step is self-education. The colonial authorities, the capitalist authorities, industrialist authorities, military authorities, all of these entities have worked in concert to generate a false picture of our society and to ensure that the lies of colonization are deeply internalized. The version of history that we get in school is, I wouldn't call it entirely inaccurate, but is definitely withholding a huge amount of information. The oppression of the state is recognized in official histories as they're taught, especially in public schools. Those oppressions might be recognized, but they're recognized briefly, and they're not fully parsed out. They don't talk about the source of the hatred and the oppression and the devastation of both Indigenous and immigrant communities. Colonization has treated both of those communities brutally, just absolutely brutally. Self-education is probably the biggest step, because when we educate ourselves about one another, we're not just supporting the other person, we're freeing ourselves as well. We free ourselves to think critically as well, and as well as to enjoy a higher level of understanding of our society, so that when you look around you at the systems that are occurring when you look around you at the things that you see every day in places like Vancouver and Victoria, you're not just looking at individuals, you're not just looking at people that made a bad choice or whatever. You can see the entire history of Canada and BC, the entire colonial history unfolding. And so it's very important for people that move here to just read history, understand history, ask about history, and especially to talk about history with one another. The history that we've received is not even close to sufficient. And it is not helpful in understanding problems that our society is facing today and has been facing since its foundations. It's people that I encounter regularly that still don't know about residential schools. I don't need no idea how that's even possible.
Yeah.
Mm,
And just that's been the feature story for the last 20 years, 25
Right.
years. People started admitting what had happened. There was a popular adoption of the truth, and incredible to run into people at airports and bus stops and stuff.
Mhm.
Don't understand the systems that they've been living amongst this entire time.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the answer. You're absolutely. I think, like for me too, I think we said it many times. Like I, of course, before coming to Canada, I know nothing about the Indigenous history in Canada. The only Indigenous kind of history I kind of know when I was studying Australia, I know a little bit of there. But the school, I went to school in Australia, and they didn't teach us much about the Indigenous history there, but it was horrible, obviously. The Australian treated them horribly. So with that kind of, I guess it's my first idea of what Indigenous, versus colonial society is only going to talk very little about it. And coming to Canada, and I went to Royal Roads University that's where I met Andrea. One of the first class we taught was the Indigenous history, and we were even brought to some Indigenous culture center and talked to some elders. And that's the first time also,
Yeah.
yeah,
Songies and
yeah.
Esquimalt. Yeah.
Yes, and we talked. That's the first time I learned about like the brutal history of residential school with serfs and the treaties, and that's also when and that really changed my idea of what Canada is, because I think for a lot of people live in Asia, at least, can speak for myself only, America or Asia or Canada. It's just this beautiful country with, great history, and that produce a lot of great things and push these technologies and push this world forward. But the part that they always missed is this Indigenous, many people had to die, many people had to bleed and were killed for this image. And that's always getting missed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and that definitely anchored me a lot too, in terms of like how I see this country and what kind of role we should play as immigrants, specifically as in this country as well.
Yeah, same. I immigrated from the States, and we were taught a little bit about, I grew up in Washington State, about Chief Seattle, some of the Puyallup First Nations. I actually immigrated from Portland, which is the Multnomah and the Clackamas First Nations down there. And honestly, that Royal Roads curriculum, that first meeting with the elder that told us his experience in residential school, it was life-changing. And I'm very thankful that we had that at the very beginning of our course. And I think that's where you have to start. How else can you start anywhere else if you're not starting there to come out of this colonial mindset? Because the immigration system is very colonial, and who they choose and who they give points to, it is very much kind of a survival of the fittest, if not we prefer certain skin tones and races and things like that. I'm thankful I learned a lot more about America's history of treating and their relationship with Indigenous people than I knew in the country that I was born in. So
That's kind of neat.
yeah, I know. I mean, Canada's still got a long way to go. And, it was here that both of us, that illusion was shattered. And I'm thankful. Yeah.
This is the age of shattering illusions for sure.
Yeah.
I love
it's
that,
good.
the age of
It's
shattering
good.
illusions.
Yes. That
That's
should be a
the tagline.
tattoo
Yeah,
Tattoo.
the tagline.
right here. No.
A t-shirt, a t-shirt.
A t-shirt, yeah. Underwear. No, I'm just kidding. Awesome. Well, we'll wrap up, Graham. Thank you so much for sharing just your perspective. When I saw that's like the biggest land back agreement, what does that actually mean from not just the BBC's perspective, right, Mer, but from someone who is related to Haida Nations and,
What a novel concept in there.
I know.
What did we ask?
Oh my gosh. Mind blown. Yes. Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, we're jumping to our next segment, which is our Canadian Salad Pop Quiz. We briefed you, Graham, a little bit on a question. So this is the part, if you're new, thanks for listening. But if you're new to our episodes, this is the part in the program where we actually ask a question related to the topic. And neither of us know the answer or the questions. So it creates a dramedy and flair for those. Well, I learn a lot from these quizzes.
Oh, true, me too.
And
Me
I
too.
think other people do too. And if you don't learn, that's okay. You're welcome anyway. Hoshin, do you have a question you'd like to ask first?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Do you know the concept of you know what is modern treaties, right?
Yes.
Modern treaties, yes.
Modern treaties.
Yeah, they're like nation to nation kind of relationship.
Okay.
Between like indigenous people, the federal government, provincial even, or the crown.
You mean the Sand Treaty.
Yeah, like treaty, yeah. But modern treaty, not
yeah,
the one that signed is, yeah.
A little worried about it for a minute, but yes, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Thanks for explaining because I didn't.
Even something newer?
No. They are usually
Circa yesterday? Yeah.
They include like the ownership of land, what they do with management, what can they do, harvesting, how environmental protection, economic development. So it usually has what is responsibility, what can you do, or what you're allowed to do, I guess, in these lands. And usually it's the government or the crown signed with the indigenous nations that reside in those lands. But anyway, modern treaties. So my question is, to date, how many modern treaties are currently in Canada?
Oh. I have no idea.
Wow.
I'm familiar with 3 of them, but I bet you I'm very unfamiliar with just everything past BC. So I would want to say maybe 8.
Or I can narrow down to BC. How many treaties in BC? How many modern treaties in BC?
Oh my gosh, 3. 3.
3? Okay, that's 3. How about you, Andrea? What is your answer?
Oh, I don't even know. I am going to just be a little bit different than Graham and go 4.
The answer, Andrea, you're right. It's 4.
It's 4. Wow.
That wasn't bad.
You were close. You get half a gold star. It's not a full
A
one.
gold star. Actually,
You're welcome.
Andrea, your guess was based on Graham, so actually,
It was. I know, Graham, without you, I wouldn't have gotten to 4. If you had said 2, I would have said 3. So honestly, thank you. Lovely.
Yes, there's currently 4 modern treaties in BC, and across the country, there's 26 modern treaties. And these treaties altogether covering over 40% of Canada's landmass.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, and we'll include that link in our website so people can fact check. We our master's program taught us one thing, and it was just check your sources. So thing that we talked about on the podcast, we've got a source that's been screened. So we're not just pulling stuff out of our nose. So we do try to do that. Yeah. The nose isn't good.
And you have to be credible sources, not Wikipedia.
Yes.
Not Wikipedia.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, my question. Are you all ready? Okay, this is a bit of a numbers question as well. The government of Canada cites that Canada has implemented how many self-government agreements involving Indigenous communities? So a self-government agreement, quote, gives Indigenous communities jurisdiction over a range of issues, including governance, education, and land management. And this is according to based off of a book, 21 Things You Need to Know About Indigenous Self-Government, a conversation about dismantling the Indian Act by President Bob Joseph, who is the Indigenous Corporate Training Inc.'s co-founder.
Self-government agreements, eh?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
55.
How many?
55.
55. Okay. Hoshin?
I would like a way bigger number.
Okay. Do you need to phone a
What-
friend?
I don't know.
Wait a second, phone a friend.
I know.
50.
50. Yeah. Call my mom. Yeah.
Self-government. What did you say, Graham? How many did you say?
I said 55. That might be a low ball.
55.
Thinking
I would
about
say
it, I'm running them up
70.
and thinking, I'm like, that's probably too.
I don't
How
know.
many?
I feel like 70.
70. Okay. All right. So this is Government of Canada. They are still looking. There's more probably in process.
In the works, yeah.
But as of 2019, there are only 25 self-government
25.
agreements, which involve 43 Indigenous communities.
Oh, that's surprising.
Oh.
I thought that it
Yeah.
Surprisingly low.
was.
BC has Yukon First Nations have the most, with BC coming in second. BC has about 6 self-government agreements.
I mean, there's
Very
hundreds of
Yeah.
hundreds of Indigenous groups in Canada.
Yeah.
There's only 25. A self-government agreement. Okay, wow.
630 First Nations, aren't there? In all of
yes,
Canada?
hundreds, yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Canada?
Do better.
Anyway. Yeah, do better. Exactly. Exactly. Well, that's our message. We will also put that on a pillow, cross stitch it along with
Do better.
what was the other thing? It was Revelation.
Of
Shattered illusions. Yes, yes. So yes. We're going to create a merch and we're going to put those both on some pillows and you can buy it all and support our podcast. No, one day, maybe down the road. But thank you so much for joining us. You can follow us on Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. And you can look at all of our resources that we've cited today on our website, canadiansalad.ca. And if you have any thoughts, comments, please send them to us directly and keep the conversation going and keep educating yourself. Thank you, Graham, very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Thank you.
For inviting me to be on your show.
All right. We'll have you back next time.
We will definitely have you back. That was
Yeah.
That
awesome.
sounds great. That sounds
Okay. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Canadian Salad is written and produced in British Columbia, Canada by Hoshin Ho and Andrea McCoy. Theme music is by Naver Avatyan from Pixabay.
This has been a good Drinklin production.